What is going on, everyone? Welcome back into another edition of the Fan Committee. It's been a very long while. We were on hiatus. Sometimes school obligations kick you in the butt, but guess what? It's the off season. It's the summer. We're back. Mike is back with me. Michael, how are you doing today? We're going to be talking some NFL draft results for our teams today.
Yeah, I'm doing great, Joe. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing all right. I'm excited to talk some Packers, get away from these Sixers who are an eternal disappointment. Packers got some optimism, both short term and long term. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. How do you feel about drafting Penn State legend Sean Clifford?
Well, we're gonna get into it, but I mean, if he's gonna get drafted, I guess I'll take it on my team. I was saying I think Sean Clifford deserves to get drafted. I meant more, maybe in the seventh round to some
Yeah,
random team than the fifth round. But at the same time, I don't mind it. I don't mind having him on the Packers. So the Dolphins, though, they didn't have a first round pick, Mike, but they did have a second round pick. They took Cam Smith, cornerback out of South Carolina. Then they took Devin Achane, I believe is how you say it,
I
running
think
back
so. Yeah.
in the third round. Then you also took Elijah Higgins and Ryan Hayes. Not gonna lie, I don't know much about those guys, but some of your later picks. So we'll start with you because I feel like the Dolphins have more impact going into this season than the Packers. Packers kind of in a rebuilding stage, had a lot of picks. Just what's your thoughts on these picks, particularly those top two players right there?
Well, the top two picks, I remember at first when the Cam Smith pick came in, I was like, I know he's good. I know he was projected to go earlier in the second round than we got him. So to that extent, it is like a value pick. But I was a little hesitant because I was like, we just traded for Ramsey. Like he's only like 28. I know Xavier Howard has his injuries and he's a little older, but he's still got time. But the more you think about it, Aaron Rodgers now plays for the Jets. I am not convinced Aaron Rodgers will return to form. There's always the chance he will because he's Aaron Rodgers. He is an all-time great quarterback. So I think it's better to have more cornerbacks than necessary, especially with how our cornerback room was at the end of the last season. Our DBs were very decimated from injuries. So I'm definitely okay with that pick.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because even though you do have those two high paid corners, at the same time, Xavier's getting up there in age. He's been there a while. He's got a big contract. You lose Byron Jones. He had to retire due to injury, and then you've been very critical of the depth behind those guys for a while now. And as you mentioned, there was also some injuries. So yeah, it feels like the Dolphins are just beefing up that secondary. Vic Fangio coming in as the defensive coordinator. Cam Smith, I mean, he listed as 6'1". I think he's one that's pretty sizable for a corner. So
Yeah.
I think that for a second round pick, like maybe it wasn't the top need. I guess the one thing I'd ask you is, are you upset that they didn't address the offensive line in these top two rounds, or these top three rounds? Or are you okay with it? Because I think
I
that's where a lot of people thought maybe that second round pick would have gone.
Yes, I'm very mixed on the offensive line because on one hand, a lot of people were very critical, like, oh, we need to draft running back and offensive line. But to me, I was more of the just offensive line because I didn't think it was a running back's fault. I know Raheem Mostert's a little older, but him and Jeff Wilson, they're good. And
They
they
played
still played
well last
pretty
year.
well
Yeah.
last season. Exactly. So I didn't think, and that was kind of weird because people were complaining about A-Chain as well. And I actually kind of like that pick a lot. To me, he projects as like replacing Raheem Mostert because this guy's really fast. But in terms of addressing the offensive line, I don't want to criticize the Dolphins because obviously they know what they're doing a little better than I do. But I am a little hesitant about it, and it kind of feels like they're banking a lot on severe improvement from some of these guys we've drafted because we spent a high draft pick on Liam Eichenberg, and he's kind of been up and down. So is Austin Jackson, and although we've seen like flashes from them that they could be good, solid starters, they're like really banking on like their development. So I get why they're doing that, but I also understand why people are concerned that like maybe we should have just brought in someone who's established or something like that. So I get both sides. So I'm a little hesitant. So
Yeah, I didn't even realize. I'm looking at the depth chart. I didn't know you guys signed Isaiah Wynn, but I guess
yes,
he's kind of had a lot of up and down over the past few years. Not as good as he might have used to be, but I don't know, for a depth signing in case he has to step in. I mean, that's a veteran who's been productive in the past. So
yeah,
I mean, honestly, like I feel like we've had this discussion before. I mean, besides Armstead, it's kind of like just a bunch of guys that you're hoping can kind of just come together and hold up. But
yeah,
definitely no one like elite, but that didn't necessarily hurt them last year until
no,
Tua's injuries and concussions kind of came into play.
yeah. And the thing with that, people were trying to blame the offensive line for Tua getting injured, but like And I
Yeah.
understand
Those freak
why.
stuff, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like it's not I think it's kind of unfair. You could say that about anything. It's like, "Oh, well, why didn't the offensive line block for, like, any quarterback who's gotten injured?" Like, you wouldn't blame a Joe Theismann's offensive line. Like, that's not really fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, Teron Armstead's really good. He's been injured a lot as well, so he hasn't played
Yeah.
frequently. So it's very up and down, so I'm kinda waiting to see. I think depending, maybe they'll trade for someone, but who knows?
Right. Yeah, I think it'd be a chain pick also. I mean, sticking with the run game theme. Yeah, like you mentioned, he ran a 4.32 at the combine, and he also caught 60 passes in college. I feel like a lot of these pass catching running backs in the NFL aren't even always pass catchers in college. So the fact that he's already doing that at A&M is kind of a good sign. And I think, like you said, he's kind of long term. Mostert, he is really good last year. He really was, but guys had a lot of injuries. He's almost 30 now. So feels like long term a chain definitely could probably even be the RB1 on this team. But yeah, I just think with McDaniel, I mean, we talked about this last year, bringing that type of system from San Fran over, he wants to have as many versatile running backs in this system as he can. Jeff Wilson was re-signed as well. So I don't know. I don't see any problem with the Dolphins backfield. Like you said, you just got to hope that O line maybe can step up and help this group go from good to like really like I don't know if elite's in the cards, but productive enough that they can help the Dolphins, reach the playoffs.
Oh, definitely. I think, as you were mentioning with like Mike McDaniel, he likes to be very versatile, which I think is also why we drafted Elijah Higgins, which we can get into that a little bit. I'm actually really excited about Itchin. I've been watching more of his highlights, he's projected to be a really good player, and I'm really excited for him because people are saying he's small. I think he's like 5'9", so he's like my height. And I know for some people they're concerned about like smaller running backs because they're like, running backs are very it's a wear and tear position, but I think people also need to consider that sometimes being a smaller running back might be useful because he's more of a speed back anyways, but that doesn't mean he hasn't shown the ability to break tackles, bounce off of a would-be tackler, stuff like that. He runs through the tackles plenty of times as well. So I don't think we're going to use him like that because we don't really need to. We have Jeff Wilson. I'm not really super worried about that, but I think Devin Achin's going to be really good. I think he's just very explosive player. He's basically just like the Jalen Waddle equivalent of a running
Yeah.
back, I
Yeah,
would
you
say.
guys do have a lot of fast players on that Dolphins offense, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Even after losing Trent Sherfield, I think Tyreek Hill might be able to mask that loss, but
Yeah, and we still have Ezukanma who
yeah,
was interesting. I know we talked about that last year. We're like,
yeah.
oh, this dude could be like the third receiver. Like this is
You
kind of
still have him
interesting.
in Dynasty?
I don't personally, but that's because I'm kind of waiting to see what happens. Because the reports came out after the season, because people were kind of just like, "What's up with Ezukanma? Like, is he really bad? Like, we drafted him fourth round. Like, we expected more from him." But it
Mhm.
turns out that apparently Wes Welker, who's our receivers coach, he had him learning every single like wide receiver position.
Hmm.
So, and it apparently just turned out they're like, yeah, Ezukanma was not in the cards to be like a starter or a spot starter at any point in the year. He was supposed to be a developmental guy the first year. So I think this upcoming year, if he plays really well, we could see maybe, and I know we talked about this last year a little bit too, but like maybe trade Cedric Wilson for an
Yeah.
offensive lineman, maybe. I don't know, something like that.
Or just trade him, set him free. I don't know why I don't know why they signed him all that money and then didn't use him because he was pretty good in Dallas. But that's another topic. But
Yeah.
yeah, you definitely seem to be loading up the receiver room with some depth. So even behind the two stars, so it does feel like that offense is going to be pretty explosive. But you mentioned the receiver, and you also took an offensive lineman in the seventh round. Do you have any opinions on these guys? I'll let you take the floor there.
For the offensive lineman, not really. I'm glad we did draft someone. I heard he was good at Michigan, and that's all I really know. So I don't really have too much about him. But Elijah Higgins, I'm very optimistic about actually.
Okay, why's that?
So I remember you asked me this question. I think after we were talking about the draft, we were just like, "Well, what's the difference between like him and Smythe and Gesicki?" Smythe is very much like the blocking tight end, and he's really good at it. And that's kind of what we need Smythe to do. And then Higgins, a lot of people were saying, "Well, like he's projected to be kind of like Mike Gesicki, but why didn't we just keep Gesicki?" Well, on one hand,
Oh, you were telling me about this guy. Is this the guy that he's a receiver in college is supposed to play tight end now? Okay.
yeah, he's like a really like big receiver. Like he's very like bulky and stuff like that. He's like 6'4", 6'5". Obviously slightly undersized for a tight end, but still good enough. And And a lot of people are talking about that. They're like, "Well, why did we get rid of Gesicki?" And it's like, well, one, Gesicki was really expensive. He wanted to get paid wide receiver money, even though he's a tight end,
Mhm.
and he also just like couldn't block to save his life. And Elijah Higgins, obviously, he played receiver in college, so it's not like he's super in depth blocker, but he's like, I'm willing to block. Like, I will try to.
Mhm.
And so, even if he ends up being like Gesicki, he will at least be the cheaper option. And that was kind of the problem. At the very least, if we couldn't keep Gesicki, we need someone cheaper to replace him at the very least. But I think he could be super important to this offense. I think if things pan out with him, obviously it's a big if. It's kind of how I feel about a lot of the Dolphins draft class. Is although I would say I like all of the picks when you slow down and think about it more, it's a lot of big ifs because there's nothing like, oh, this is a surefire, like this is going to work. So
Yeah, that's a logical kind of pick for this Dolphins team, especially when you don't have a lot of draft picks in this draft. Kind of finding someone like that in the 6th round, even if it don't pan out, it's at least worth the risk.
yeah, definitely, I agree.
Yeah, so I don't know, like I think this Dolphins for their limited picks, I think like we said, we discussed the offensive line, but other than that, feels like they addressed what they wanted to address. Now the Packers, on the other hand, had a plethora of draft picks, and I thought this draft was really, really solid for the Packers. I mean, I think the Lucas Van Ness pick, I think everyone wanted us to take like Jackson Smith-Njigba in the 1st round. Once
Yeah,
again, we're on year 12 of this. Packers have found talent outside the 1st round at receiver for forever. I don't know why we're still making this out to be such a big deal, especially when they took 2 receivers, actually 3 receivers last year, if you throw
yeah,
in Samori Toure, and they took another 2 receivers in this draft. So
yeah,
I was happy with the Lucas Van Ness pick. Seems like at Iowa, very good defensive player. Like he profiles as an edge rusher, but he also could play D line, maybe stop the run. He's that versatile of a player. Seems long term he'll be an edge guy though. Feels like Preston Smith. Maybe after this year, with his salary, with his increasing age, he'll depart, and we'll have Lucas Van Ness kind of become more of a near every down player along with Rashawn Gary. So I thought that was a really good pick. Packers front seven, I think, has needed some help for a while. So if Lucas Van Ness can even help improve that a bit, I think it's a good pick. And then I really wanted Michael Mayer or Dalton Kincaid, but the thing is, like, I wanted Michael Mayer 13th, but then once he went in the 2nd round, I was like, okay, maybe that would have been a reach, even though before the draft it sounded like he was supposed to go a lot higher than that. So they wind up with Luke Musgrave, and then also later Tucker Kraft. The tight end position for the Packers has long been a problem. It was really a problem last year. I mean, Mercedes Lewis was pretty much their best tight end last season. I know Robert Tunyon probably had more catches, but I can't really say he was impacting the team on a huge level. I
yeah,
think with Musgrave, who they compared to Greg Olson in the draft. Greg Olson's one of my favorite tight ends. I mean, he's tough as nails for that Panthers team for a while. So I think if that's the type of comparison he's getting, and then Tucker Kraft seems more of a guy who they're more confident in his ability to both be a pass catcher and a blocker. I think it's a good mix. Tyler Davis, Josiah DeGora, these guys aren't going to make a difference. I think they needed to address the position. And when you
yeah,
had that many draft picks, I was really happy with it. Then they took Jaden Reed, the receiver, in the 3rd round. I was a fan of that pick as well. I think more of a speedster type where they're hoping Christian Watson is really the do it all guy. We'll see if it happens. He's obviously displayed his speed as well, but feels like they want his speed to just be part of the equation for him. And then Romeo Dobbs is kind of just, I don't want to call him a role player, but I feel like that's what his ultimate destiny is. But at the same time, that's okay. Like if he can play out of the slot a little bit, but then also stretch the field at times. I feel like if we have Jaden Reed coming in as a guy who is strictly a field stretcher, strictly a guy Jordan Love can heave it down the field to as he develops, I think that's worth the investment. As long as he continues to evolve just as a route runner to get himself open. So I think it's worth a pick. I don't think next year they're going to have to invest in a receiver position in the first few rounds, in the first 2 days of the draft. I don't think that'll be necessary going forward. So I'm glad they kind of did this. I'm glad they tied it all up with the receiver room. Uh, I do think they need to add a veteran. Jarvis Landry is still out there. There's a few other guys. I just think they need someone who can move the chains the way like Alan Lazard or even Randall Cobb was doing. Just because Jordan Love is such a young quarterback, doesn't quite have the chemistry with these guys just yet. But in terms of building for the future, I think in the first 3 rounds of this draft, especially, they did a really good job. Did you think Gutekunst did a good job with the Packers draft as well, or do you have any thoughts on it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you guys had like 14 picks, I would
Yeah, they
something
had
like
four
that.
seventh rounders. They might have had two in the sixth. It was wild. I mean, we mentioned Sean Clifford earlier, but yeah, there was a lot of draft picks.
No, you I mean, obviously like with a lot of draft classes, like with the really big draft class, there's going to be some misses in there, especially with like some of the lower end draft guys. But the Lucas Van Ness pick was a little confusing. I also do understand when you framed it with the whole like Preston Smith is getting older, he's kind of expensive, and when you frame it like that, that actually makes a lot more sense now. To me personally, I still think you guys could have traded down and gotten him, but if you guys felt strongly about like needing to get him, I don't think it's like the worst pick in the world. Like he would have gone first round anyways, so I do get why the Packers drafted him. Musgrave, I've heard is pretty good. Jaden Reed, I've heard the same thing, so I get why you're excited about those two. I'm actually kind of excited about Tucker Kraft. I actually kind of like him a lot. He's a good chain mover, as you were saying. Like they need a guy who can come in and be the chain mover, and maybe he can do that for you guys. But I think you guys did pretty well. I think drafting Sean Clifford in the fifth is a little interesting. I think you guys could have gotten him in like the seventh, but you guys do need like a backup behind him because you guys don't really have anyone behind Jordan Love.
Yeah, that's the thing about Sean Clifford is like he's the same age as Jordan Love. He's in college for 6 years. I don't know. I mean, he won me over by the end of this past season. No, that's probably because he won a Rose Bowl and stuff like that. But at the same time, at the very least, he's mature. He's not going to have as high of a learning curve in terms of what it takes to be like a good teammate and stuff like that. Now, maybe when it comes to if he ever has to go into a game, there might be a learning curve. He's not the
Yeah,
most mobile guy, but
yeah,
I don't know. He has some. He's an accurate enough quarterback. I don't know. Arm strength wise, probably not at the top, but I don't know. I don't really think James Franklin ever let him try that much, anyways. So he's kind of
yeah,
always been a move the chain quarterback. Maybe the pick is because if on the scary occasion that Jordan Love were to get injured, and if Sean Clifford somehow step into a game this season, I mean, we're kind of screwed anyways. So maybe the thought is like, at the very least, Sean Clifford could keep the offense moving where we can get first downs, where maybe there's not going to be big plays, but if Jordan Love were to get injured, we can shift to even more heavy run. Like I think they're going to run a lot this year with Jones and Dillon, but then if Jordan Love got injured, we might be running close to as much as the Titans were running a few years ago. But I don't know. I'm trying to be optimistic. I want Sean Clifford to succeed. Maybe he can play with Rasheed Walker. Put Rasheed Walker in there if he has to play to block for him because Rasheed Walker's still on the team. Have that chemistry. I don't know. All I know is I'm really concerned that the Packers are going to sign Carson Wentz. That's a rumor going around right now that Sean Clifford's going to wind up being the third string. Danny Etling will get cut, which I think will happen either way.
yeah.
Teddy Bridgewater and Joe Flacco are also out there. I think Joe Flacco, I would sign him if we want a veteran backup. But at the same time, also, why not just let Sean Clifford and Jordan Love be the quarterback for him? I mean, the Packers aren't going to make the playoffs this year. I see no reason Sean Clifford doesn't have a shot in making the 53 man.
No, that's totally valid. I mean, you know me, I'm not the biggest Sean Clifford fan because I
Yeah,
thought, although yes, I was definitely a bit harsh on him at times. I felt he was limiting the ceiling on the like Penn State offense. I thought we had a lot of good guys, in there who could have. I think we could have been a better team if we had a better quarterback. But I also, to be fair, Sean Clifford is not that bad. You're right. He's a guy who can come in, manage it. He can make the short intermediate throws that need to be made, at least from what we saw at Penn State. And obviously, the NFL is a different league; it's different. But Lafleur, I know a lot of people were complaining last year, and I do understand that some of his
I
play
was
calls,
complaining.
some of his play calls were questionable, but I think he's still proven he's a good head coach. And maybe last year he was making weird decisions out of desperation. Who knows? But in previous years he's been a good coach. So I think if anything, if Sean Clifford has to come into the game, they can manage something until you can find a better solution. So I totally agree with you on that stance. And if anything, like sign like Teddy Bridgewater, Joe Flacco, like if an injury happens, but not before. I do kind of
That's
agree
fair.
with that. So
Yeah, as long as it's not Carson Wentz, I'll be happy. I can't. I'm long past my days of defending him. I was a defender of Wentz going into his Colts tenure, but I've been proven wrong. The Eagles fans were right.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a shame because Carson Wentz, he really had it all, and if he fell so quickly, which is a shame because even the year after the Super Bowl, he was still pretty good,
Right.
and then it just kinda crumbled,
I agree. I think he is what he is at this point. So some of the
unfortunately.
Packers' later picks, we took Colby Wooden from Auburn, defensive lineman. Just like I said, I think in the interior of the defensive line, especially, we need depth. Lucas Van Ness isn't necessarily that, so I think that's a fine pick. The other pick I was actually really excited about. They took Anders Carlson, the kicker from Auburn, Daniel
Yeah,
Carlson's brother. I think that's how you say it. But they took a kicker. Apparently, they're like the scouting report on him is that he's not a good kicker from behind the 50, but he must be super accurate if they took him because listen, I love Mason Crosby, but he just hasn't been the same Mason Crosby over the past couple seasons, in my
yeah.
opinion. Now, if we're taking a kicker who can't make 50-yard field goals, well, that's kind of just the same problem Mason Crosby had, except this is a rookie and not a 39-year-old. But I'm gonna trust Scoot. I'm gonna trust they worked him out, and maybe he flashed more potential than maybe Auburn gave him the chance to show. Kicking, so hopefully this is not a wasted pick.
Yeah, I mean, also, like, maybe the reason they, like, drafted Carlson, which, like, I did see was pretty accurate, but not, like, as you were saying, like, behind the 50, it kinda gets a little shaky. I mean, maybe they're also just kind of expecting like, Jordan Love's got, like, a decent arm, so maybe they're like, "We're if we ever are taking a field goal, we're not gonna be that far out because
Yeah,
he has a crazy arm." I would say he's got a pretty good one, so maybe that's kinda what their line of thinking is, like, this offense, like, as you were mentioning earlier, Jayden Reed, he's like a deep threat. Christian Watson has shown he can do a bit of that as well. Maybe that's kinda what they're hoping for, they're expecting more of like a deep threat kind of offense that doesn't like, if they do take field goals, it's not, like, past the 50, so maybe that's kinda what they're hoping for, so
right. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see. It's always interesting when teams draft kickers. San Fran took a Jake Moody in like the fourth round, so that was interesting. They're gonna hope he's just as good as Robbie Gold was, but I don't know. Mike? What do you think? Just to wrap up on our teams here, do you think either of these teams, like destinies this season, were raised considerably by their drafts, or do you think it's kind of just filling out some depth?
I would say the Packers are doing more for the future. I think they drafted a lot of guys who potentially could continue developing. But I think as you were mentioning, like playoffs, if you guys make the playoffs, great. But it's not really in the cards this year, and I think that's what you guys are kind of hoping for. And I think that's fine. I think you guys are more aiming for like 2, 3 years down the line. I think the Dolphins, I think we're also a little similar. Like we're shooting for like the next 2 or 3 years, but also I think they also do want to shore up some positions for this year as well. But we have vets in front of them that should help them develop quicker. Like as we were talking about, like with the Packers, like receivers, like there's not a lot of veteran receivers on that team.
Yeah,
So like I think with the Dolphins, maybe like A Chain and Smith will do a lot this year. But outside of them two, I think the other guys are for like next year or the year after that. So
yeah, I completely agree. All right, well, Mike, I'm glad we got to talk some NFL draft.
of
Thank you guys
course,
for listening to the fan committee. Make sure to follow on Spotify and Apple if you aren't already. Also, head over to the Joe Toon YouTube channel because I'd be posting some clips from there from the pod there as well. So thanks for listening. Catch us next time. Have a great rest of your day.